giving you an idea how this is going to work. So this is the Streamlit chatbot tutorial. Okay. So we are going to build a local, we're going to write a local code in our computer. This is our PC, and we are writing code in Python. Okay. And we are connecting with the OpenAI server. And we are also importing Streamlit functions. Streamlit functions. So when we connect to the OpenAI server, we're also going to get functions from the OpenAI server. And this is going to help us create the final chatbot. Okay, so the chatbot is going to look like this. Okay. This is a chatbot. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. All right, so you have a main. Let me get this a darker color. Main title. And then you have the subtitle. Then user assistant. And then user assistant. So this is a series of messages or the thread that the chatbot is going to have and display. And this is going to be your prompt, or it's going to be the user query. So we're going to say, enter your query here, and the user is going to write the query, and it's going to display something like this with the main title, the subtitle, then the user's prompt, the query, the assistant's response, and it's going to store all the messages using the session state feature. Okay. So now that we have a general idea what the interface is going to look like, let's go back to our coding interface, and we're going to start coding this from scratch. All right, let's do this. Okay. Okay, first we're going to import OpenAI. So the import functions are used to include libraries and modules needed in your Python script. For instance, import OpenAI brings in the OpenAI library so you can interact with its API. And similarly, we're going to import Streamlit as ST. When we say something like as ST, it basically creates a shortcut. So we don't have to use the Streamlit word to call the functions. We can just use ST to call the functions. I'll show you later how this is going to work. Then we're going to import from OpenAI, import OpenAI. So we're going to import the OpenAI function. And it has a couple of parameters that you can use to authenticate your OpenAI, authenticate with your OpenAI server. So We're going to show that as well. From config import star. We got the shortcut for that. So let's go ahead and import. So let me give you an idea what the code base is going to look like. We are using VS Studio Code. If you don't have this software, go ahead and download VS Studio Code. It's a really clean interface where you can manage your code base as well as run code from this software. And it's absolutely free, so you can download it and run Python code locally in your computer. So if you haven't done so, go ahead and do that. Install Python, install VS Studio Code, and you should be able to run Python code from your local computer. And you can create a directory. If you already have a directory, you just go open folder, and it's going to take you to your local directories, and you select the directory that you want to work out of. So in this directory, I have two files. One is the config.py, and in that file, I am writing out my OpenAI assistant key. So basically, it's another Python file similar to this. Instead, I just have OpenAI API key variable, and I just put in my OpenAI API key. Okay, so that way it's secure, and then I don't have to share it with everyone. And you can just import it into your package, into your main.py file, and your code is ready to go. Okay, so import star, and then we're going to do import time. All right, these are all the functions we need. These are all the packages that we need to build out our Streamlit chatbot. Okay, now we are going to create the client object. Client object. So client is an object that represents a session between the Python application and the server, e.g. OpenAI. It's used to send requests and receive responses through the API. So what we're going to do is use this function that we just imported, OpenAI, and that's going to help us authenticate the client. And we're going to specify in the parameter the API key. And we've already created the OpenAI API key in config.py, so we're just going to import this in. All right. So now the client is authenticated. We have a direct connection with OpenAI servers. So let's go ahead. See. Okay, so as you can see from the diagram, we need to connect with the OpenAI servers. We need to import the functions from the OpenAI servers, connect with it, have like a two-way communication so that we can receive our assistant files, create assistant files, upload files to the assistant, upload messages to the assistant, get the response back. So these communication is now open because we have created the client object. And then I'm going to show you how we can use the client object to carry out these operations. So we're going to cover the Streamlit functions in a little bit. The Streamlit functions are going to give you that front end look. So Streamlit is a Python library that allows you to create front end similar to this, right? Similar to this. So it allows you to create easy chatbot components like the title, the subtitle, the user assistant icons you see here, the ability to store session state. So these are all abilities from Streamlit. Now, Streamlit is open source, so it's absolutely free. when you use a chatbot using Streamlit, you not only save on cost, but it's also really fast and efficient. You're using Python code to directly write these kind of applications, whether it's web app or chat application, and it will help you tremendously with your projects. So knowing Python code will give you a superpower. So yeah, so this is pretty much the setup. So let's go ahead back to the code. So now we're going to set up the assistant ID and initialize the OpenAI client. We actually did that. So assistant ID. I'm going to assume you created your assistant already using the OpenAI platform. You can go to OpenAI platform, create your assistant. You're going to get an assistant ID. The components you need to create an assistant are going to be your instructions for the assistant, and then I guess a name for your assistant. Just very simple. You create your assistant, you're going to get an assistant ID from the OpenAI platform. I already created an assistant in my platform, so I have assistant ID. So you're going to get that assistant ID. So I'm assuming you have your OpenAI key, your assistant ID. Both of those are essential when you're creating this chatbot. Okay, cool. Now we're going to write a function, okay? We're going to write a function called ensure single thread ID. Let's go ahead and let's see if you don't know. Okay, when we have a terminal available, now we can run the code and see the results. Now, before we even run the function, I'm assuming you're a beginner Python coder, so you want to see how Python works. For example, you write a code, and then you want to see the response back from the code. Okay, so we're going to do like a print hello world. Print hello world. So this is the initiation code. If you're starting off with Python, you should know how to use print commands. Print allows you to write a text in a format that you wish, and then the computer is going to repeat back that text. So let's show you how this is going to work. So I specified in my Python code print hello world, and we save this. I believe it automatically saves the files. If not, you just press Control S to save it. So let's go ahead and let's say Python main py. Notice it says hello world. So with the print command, I can print any kind of text that I would like. All right, so you can change it to hello Sam, save it, and then you can press the up arrow to call back the previous message, and it will display that previous command message. So you can run it again. Hello, Sam. So just with this setup, you can see that you have the power and control to write your Python code and run it straight from your local computer. No hassle, absolutely free softwares, and very easy to do, all right? So if you don't know how function works, Function is essentially, let me see. Function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. In Python, functions are defined using the def keyword. Okay, so what we're going to do, give you an example how a function works. So with def, we say this is a test, we call it test. And then we give a parameter. You can specify as many parameters as you want. We'll just say, we'll call parameter name, and then the semicolon, and then you go to the next line, and it's important, the next line is indented, okay? So it automatically, when it's a Python code, when you press enter here, it's automatically going to indent the next line of code. And here, you just say print name. Similar print command that we used before. Instead, we wrapped it into a function. Okay, so the way, so in functions, you can also just say return, and it's just going to return this output. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this function. Test Sam. Test hello world. Okay, save. Okay, it did not display the results. So to display the results, we just say print, save. Oops, all right. Notice it says hello world. So yeah, with functions, you can make this a really complicated functions, and you can reuse that block of code anywhere in your application. So this allows you to keep your applications clean, keep your code base clean. You could have one file, like in this case, we have a file called main.py that has pretty much the whole setup. But you can create one file called functions.py that's gonna store all the functions that we need for our code base. And then reference this, just like we imported all the variables from config.py, we can import all the variables from functions, or all the functions from functions.py if you already create function in your code base. Okay, so we now have an idea how function works. Let's go ahead and write the function. Now, before we write the function, let me explain to you another thing. Streamlit, here we go. Okay, so basically, check this out. Uh, okay, so basically, Streamlit runs from top to bottom. What's going to happen when you enter your message and you run the message, it's going to forget all the previous messages, and it's going to run from top to bottom, meaning it will display the title, the subtitle, and then it's going to display your current prompt and your and the assistance message, right? So it's going to forget all the previous messages that we've sent because it did not store the message. So we have to store these messages using a feature called session state. Streamlit allows you to store any variables, not just messages. It could be thread IDs, assistant IDs, anything that would be useful for you to persist throughout the length of the session. Okay, so what is a session, you might be asking? Okay, so session state in Streamlit refers to variables that preserve users' data between interactions. when user interacts with a Streamlit app, the data in ST session state remains persistent across reruns of the app. In a little bit, I'll get you familiar with the session state function in Streamlit. Okay, so Streamlit has a set of functions that that you need to use in your code base. So let's see how session state works. Streamlit documentation session state. Okay, this is also going to be the holy grail when you're building Streamlit applications. Make sure you bookmark the session state, bookmark Streamlit documentation. There's also a community around it. So if you have questions, you can also ask the community, get their responses. So this is how you initialize a variable into the session state so that that variable persists throughout the length of the session. If key not in st.session state, st.session state key equals to value. Okay, this is pretty much the setup. Let's go back to our code and let's write this up. So we're going to say if thread. This is another way you can really do this faster. You just copy this, paste it here, and then you follow the same framework. In our setup, we need something called a thread ID. Okay, thread ID is going to be a unique identifier of the thread. And a thread is a collection of messages. So when you're working with OpenAI, I've made a video before how the assistant framework works. Thread will basically store all the messages in the conversation, and it will have a thread ID. So in order to really interact with your assistant, you need to first create a thread. It's going to be empty at first, but then as you interact with the assistant, it's going to store your message, the assistant's message, etc. So these are all available through the thread. And what we want in our Streamlit application, the thread that the assistant or the Streamlit application we want the application to use the same thread throughout the whole conversation so that it doesn't act like, someone with dementia or something like that. Like every time you ask a new prompt, it creates a new thread. We don't want that to happen. We want it to use the same thread throughout the whole conversation. So we're going to just write this up and it'll make sense more, trust me, as we build out the application. But understand we need the thread ID and we need to create a function that we can use later so that the Streamlit application calls the same thread ID every time. All right, so this is the setup. If thread ID not in st session state. And again, the reason why we're using st is because we've already made Streamlit. We've made a shortcut for Streamlit function or Streamlit package called st. So every time we want to use any functions from Streamlit, we can just use st to reference it. So it's a shortcut, it's a quick hack, saves you a couple letters to write. So if thread ID not in st session state, we're going to say thread, okay, thread equals to client, threads create, right? st session state thread ID equals to thread ID. Return st session state thread ID. Okay. Let's go back to the OpenAI Assistant documentation. Okay. Also, if you haven't bookmarked this web page, I recommend you highly to bookmark this page because you're going to be using this a lot when you're building OpenAI Assistant using Streamlit. Now, also notice on the top, new in the Assistant API retrievals for up to 10,000 files. This is possible with its new um, file retrieval system called the file search feature. I made a video on it. If you want to learn more about this, check this out. But for this video, we won't be using any knowledge base. We won't be using any file search feature. We're just going to create a simple chatbot that interacts with the assistant. And if we ask a question, it just responds back. Now we can customize this even further by adding knowledge bases, by adding custom functions, and so much more. Okay, but for the purpose of this, we want to make this really simple and just use the simple framework. Also, if you are not familiar with the assistant framework, you need to start here, how assistants work. This is going to give you an idea about the assistant framework. Okay, what is threads? We already talked about threads, so you know the thread is a collection of messages. And then there's another component to the assistant is the run. We prepare the thread, we prepare the assistant, and then we send off the run. Okay, we send off the run, we can get streaming text responses. The run could call the knowledge base, the run could call custom functions, the run could just reference the prompt and the thread to generate the response and give you back that response. So these are all the abilities of a run, and we can see all the events that happen during a run when we stream the outputs. And I'll show you that as well in a later video. Understand these are the components and be really familiar with the framework before diving into the assistant. Okay, so where are we? So we are, so we used the client.beta threads.create. So threads.create function to create a new thread. Okay, so again, remember that the client is an authenticated connection with the OpenAI server. So when we have this all set up, we can call the threads.create function. So let's go ahead and look at the threads.create function. So you are going to use the API reference, and then you're going to use the threads.create. So this is the function that you're going to use to create an empty thread. Before you can send any messages, you need to create threads. And you need to then send off those messages to the thread. The thread is going to save and store all your messages. Now, if you're working with the APIs for the first time, this is what it looks like. Okay, you'll have an example request. If this is set to CURL, make sure you set it to Python so you know the code to use for Python. And there's a response block, the request and response. These two are important components. When you import, we've already imported the OpenAI function. We've already authenticated that function, created our authenticated client object. Now we are creating the thread. But instead, to wrap it with the Streamlit capabilities, We're using the session state feature so that we can create an empty thread if it's not already created, and we can retrieve the thread if it is already created. So something like that, we need to write this up and use this in the framework of Streamlit as well. So you have to think just beyond the OpenAI assistant. Now we have to think how I can incorporate this with the front end capabilities, which is Streamlit. Okay. The response back, every time you create a thread, you're going to get an ID. You're going to get object, created at, metadata, tool resource, other stuff. Okay, we are not really concerned about all this. We just need the ID. Every time you create a thread, you're going to get a thread, like a unique thread ID. So we have the request, we have the response. Let's go back to the code. Okay, if session state. All right, so basically, check this out. Check this out. This is awesome. Let me show you how you can read this code now. Save thread ID not in st.session state. So we want to store a variable in the session state so that it persists throughout the length of the session. So we call this thread ID. If thread ID not in st session state, thread equals to client beta. So we basically create the thread object using that function from OpenAI. We create the thread object. It's going to store the new thread in an object similar to this, okay? Then we're basically, because thread ID is not already stored in the session state, we're just basically now storing this, storing the thread ID, restoring the actual ID. So to reference or retrieve specific variables from an object, you use a point right here. So thread ID. So we pulled out the thread ID from this object, and now we're storing it into a local variable called thread ID. Okay, and that is going to be used to persist throughout the session. Hopefully that makes sense. Now check this out. We're not going to use return because return is used when you're using a function. So we're just going to say print. Print. Okay. Now we have wrote some code so far, and I've already taught you how to use the print command, and you should always have the print command in your back pocket so that you can use it anytime to log specific points in the code. So if you want to check what's happening at each step in the code and you want to log it, print is a very useful command, and it's going to help you fix or diagnose any errors throughout the code. Okay, so this is what I use as well for my coding project. So print. So let's go ahead and run this now. Save this and see what the thread ID variable looks like. We just saved it. So we're not going to run. So when we run it, it's going to run from top to bottom. Import all the packages, authenticate, create the assistant ID, create the thread. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. Python main.py. All right, let's see if we get an error. Session state does not function when running a script without Streamlit.run. Streamlit run. So this is great. Now we have some insights. Now, this is also key. Whenever you see an error, don't get afraid. Don't freak out. This is normal. This is just going to help you, just going to guide you, give you directions how to proceed. So And with hundreds of iterations, it will become second nature. So we do this all the time, and error handling or just reading error messages is common practice. So don't get frustrated when you see these messages. So we have not initiated a Streamlit application, and Streamlit applications are called in a different way. We don't use Python main.py. We use Streamlit run main.py, something like that. That's how we initiate that code. So let's go ahead and run. When we run this command, it's also going to open up a web application in your local browser. Okay. Currently, we do not have anything in the Streamlit app as far as the front end. This is what we want to be creating eventually, right? Which will have a main title, a subtitle, user assistant. Currently, there is no front end component, so it's going to be empty. But if you go back to the VS Code, you'll know, or the software, you'll notice the thread ID printed in the console. Okay. So this is very important. Now I want you to understand this. You can print certain things in the code itself, and it's going to print out or log those uh, things in your terminal, but it's not going to show up in the front end. So that's the beauty of the print command. You can see what's happening on the back end without that having to affect the front end. So this is key. We've created the thread ID, and now we're showing you the thread ID. This is a unique identifier for the thread that we just created. All right, let's see. So we create the thread. Now let's wrap this into a function. Okay, let's wrap this into a function. So the way we do this is very simple. We first explain how the function works. If you're still not familiar with it, this will help you clear any kind of doubt. So function is initiated with a def keyword. Then you have the name of the function, the parameters, A, B, whatever. And then this is indented, okay? So the next line is indented. You say A plus B. This is the body of the function. This is where you specify what exactly needs to happen with the parameters you specified. You wrote up the body. Now you want to basically return those results. Okay, we are going to actually, in this line, we just say, we have it indented, as you know. We have this line indented, and we say return A plus B. This is the function. Now, the function is a block of code that you can reuse anytime, anywhere throughout the application. Okay, you just create it, set it, and forget it. Now, it's only going to run when you call the function. So let's say we call the function. In this case, we call it name. So let's say we want to call this function. We say name, and then specify A and B. A and B could be numerical data because that's where we can do these kind of operations, A plus B. So the way we do this, we say 2, 3. This is how we call the function. And then when we call the function, it's going to return 5. Okay, because this is the operation that's going to happen in the function. So when we call this function name to comma 3 is going to say 5. And we can run this function anywhere throughout the code. We can say 3, 6, then name 4, 5. Okay, so it's going to do these operations everywhere in that application. Okay, cool. So let's go back and run. Let's go ahead and create the function now. So first and foremost, we need def. Let's call it ensure single thread ID. And we add a semicolon. This is just the framework of creating functions. You always follow this format. Now, in this format, we don't have a parameter like to implement. We just want to run this without any parameters. So you don't have to use A, B, or anything inside the parentheses. So we're going to now indent this, as we talked about. And we instead of printing out this, we're just going to return this. Return. When you're using a return, you don't need parentheses. You can just do this. So again, what's happening if thread ID not in session state, if the variable called thread ID not in session state, then we create a thread using client beta threads.create, and then we store the thread ID object similar to this. This is the object. Every time we create a thread in OpenAI Assistant, we have an ID. We're just going to store that ID into the session state thread ID variable and return this session state.thread ID. So basically, if thread ID is not created, if thread ID is not in the session state, we create it. And if it is in the session state, we just return it. Okay, so that is the basically framework. So the way it follows a certain condition, like for example, if we say if thread ID not in session state, and the next line is indented, so so everything that follows that condition is going to be in this indent block, and everything that doesn't follow that condition is going to be outside of that indent block. It's running line by line, okay, top to bottom. So if this meets the condition, if thread ID is not there, then we create it. Else, or it's not really else, it's just going to the next line, return the thread ID. So there only could be two conditions here. Okay, so we're just running top to bottom. So that function is created, and now we are going to now we're going to write up the Streamlit web app front end. Okay, currently we don't have any components, so let's start building out the front end. st set page config page icon all right. Now we say st title. Again, these are functions provided by Streamlit, and we're just calling these. Streamlit made it really streamlined, so you can just use title, caption. Actually, let me show you something. You go to Streamlit documentation, which is Streamlit. Streamlit cheat code, cheat sheet. Okay, these are all the functions that you really need with Streamlit. Just bookmark this and use it in your web applications. So ST title, yeah, ST title is one of them. You have header, subheader, so much more. So let's go back to our code, ST title, we call it chatbot. Then we say ST caption. Just write this up. Caption, okay. Cool. So we created somewhat of a front end for our web application. Let's go ahead and see what that's going to look like. So we say Control S to save this, and then we're going to. Now this is already running. Let's see if this had changed. Let's go ahead and refresh this. Okay, perfect. So now you have a basic interface for your chatbot. You have a title, you have a subtitle or a caption. Now you can say something like, wow, this is so easy. And you say, press Control S. And let's go back here. We run this. Wow, this is so easy. So this is really the whole framework, how you can use your like Streamlit application. All right. Now go back to the original caption. It's going to be this. Okay, we'll keep it like that. Now we're going to move on to the next piece. We'll create a prompt box. Okay, we'll create a prompt box. Show you what it looks like. Let's go back to my video here. All right, so basically at the bottom here, there is a prompt box. You want to create this prompt box to provide box for users to type in their query. Okay, so we are going to use this code. Prompt equals to st chat input, enter your message. Let's go back to the documentation. Let's see st chat input. All right, there are two kinds of inputs. There's the chat input, displays a chat input widget at the bottom of the app. What if you want to display it at the top of the app when you're building something like a web app? You don't want the chat input to be at the bottom, you want it to be at the top. So use something like a text input. Okay, so text input. And you could use text input to collect user's name or any kind of other variables. Perhaps you're using a login interface. You want to collect the user's name, password, and then authenticate them into the application. You can do that with the text input. But for our case, we're going to use a chat input feature, right? So this is how you're going to write this up. Prompt, st chat input, enter your message. So whatever message you type, it's going to be entered into the prompt. And let's just see how this is going to work. Well, let's save it. Let's go step by step so you can see exactly what's happening at each step. We run this again. Cool. We just now created a chat input feature in our chatbot. How easy was that? Now we just need the user assistant message. Okay. It's going to be very easy to set this up now. Um, now let's write a simple message and see how that's going to look. So if prompt, just like we talked about, when we are writing conditional statements, we want to use a semicolon in that line and indent it. So everything that follows that condition is going to be in the next indented block of code. So if prompt, so if there is a prompt, so if user types a prompt, then we're going to write a message. So let's go back to our Streamlit application. Let's see, st.write. Okay, let's do this, st.write. Hello. So the way you read this, if there is a prompt, if user writes a prompt, we're just gonna type back hello. All right, let's go ahead and do this. We save it, go back to our application, we refresh this, all right, and we type a message, test, and it's typing hello. How cool is that? Now we go back here, and instead of hello, we want to echo back the user's query. Okay, we want to echo back whatever user's giving us, we're going to give them back. Notice we saved the user's query in a variable called prompt. So we can call this back up using the prompt. And now check this out. We save this. We go ahead and run this again. And we say, this is a test. It's writing back my response. Why are you copying me? Wow, it's echoing back everything that I'm saying. Now notice why we need to use session state, because every time we type a message, it just forgets all the previous messages, right? So what was the message I sent before this? No idea. With Streamlit, with this current setup. So we need to use the session state so that we can store the messages. We can store all the messages and have it persist. So you will see something like this. Okay, I can't find it, but basically, you know what I'm saying. All right, so let's go back and let's go back here to the Streamlit documentation. Over here, they've also added something called a context. So with st chat message user, st write. So this is adding context. So you'll notice we have context here. So let's go back here. So this assistant icon that you see right here, the user icon, the one in orange and red, these are done with something called context. So the way we provide context is with the with functions, the with and the chat message. So Streamlit already built in two kinds of context. You can create your own avatars as well, but Streamlit has a default user and assistant avatar. So we're just going to use this context and see what that looks like in our Streamlit code. If prompt with blah, 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 And then we indent it so the ST-write is within that context, and then also within that if prompt framework. Okay, so you have to think logically one step at a time. Boom. So now let's go ahead and run this, see how that looks. This is a test. Okay, notice now we have a context. You have users icon. What if we change the context to assistant? And we run this again. Test again. Assistant avatar. Very easy, very simple. You can set this up in your own framework. You can change your avatar. And that's essentially how this is working. All right, so moving on. We've created a code called ensure single thread. Okay, we're gonna apply this later, don't worry. Let's go ahead and let's set up something where we store the messages one by one. Now, every time we write a new message, it forgets the old messages, right? So let's set up a system so that we can store all our messages throughout the length of the conversation. So not only are we displaying the message, we're also going to use something. So we're now going to use the session state feature to store a variable called messages. This variable is going to persist throughout the length of the session. We're going to write this in the same format we wrote this when we created the thread. So let's go ahead and write this up. So if messages not in st session state, then st session state dot messages equals to, okay, there we go. Let's get rid of this. All right. I see some people here. If you can type in the chat where you're from and what would you like to learn. Today, I am showing you how you can create a Streamlit chatbot from scratch using OpenAI Assistant. We are showing you how to create a simple front end and also connect with the OpenAI Assistant. Okay, great. India, that's great. I'm originally from Bangladesh, so I grew up there, and went to India 2 times. Beautiful place. What city are you from? Okay. Yeah, no problem. Anytime. If you could type in the chat, what is your level of Python coding? I can tailor the content as well. Kolkata. Oh, so আপনি বাংলা বলেন? আপনি বোধহয় শুদ্ধ বাংলা কথা বলেন. So obviously you speak Bengali. So let me go ahead and go back to the code. I've covered a lot of material so far. So if you want to, oh, you're an expert Python developer. Okay, this is great. Yeah, I've been creating some videos with about the OpenAI assistant, how things work. I've noticed a lot of people are beginners, so I wanted to make a beginner-friendly video so that people get caught up with the OpenAI assistant functions as well as Python. Are you working for a company? Okay, that's great. That's great. What is it? So, if you're using OpenAI Assistant or generative AI, what are some of the applications you are using it for? What are you intending to learn? Perhaps that could be also useful in some of the future videos. Okay, so we are writing. We're creating. We are basically storing the messages in the session state feature of Streamlit, and then we are initiating an empty list for the messages. So this is going to be an empty list, but when let's say I ask a query, the system gives me a response back, we're going to append this one by one in that list. Okay, and let's go ahead and start doing that. ST, right? So recommend you to make a video on creating your own chatbot like ChatGPT. Yeah, exactly. No, we are building up to that. And this is actually going to work similar to ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is really an LLM model, and then you have a front end that allows the user to talk with the LLM model. So very simple. It's there's actually a lot of apps that are built on top of ChatGPT, right? So I think that's where I want people to start thinking about. That's the direction I want people to think about, because there's a lot of copy paste applications. All they're doing, they have ChatGPT on the back end, right? They have ChatGPT on the back end, and then they're just like a talk to PDF. It's just ChatGPT and a PDF document, something like that. So instead of thinking about copy paste solutions, I want people to think about how you can customize this for a particular niche, right? Are you working for a specific niche like finance, healthcare, uh, hospitality, something like that? Sundarla, maybe you have some insight into what people are looking for in your particular niche. There's definitely a lot of opportunities with AI, but I think a lot of things now is very general. They're not very niche specific. So when you can make this more niche specific, it can really add a lot of value to your specific community. Automatic car simulation. Wow, that's interesting. So is that something like self-driving cars, or testing car accidents and how testing the performance of cars, something like that? I'm not really exactly sure what that means. But it looks like you could be using a lot of AI in that field. So that is something that might be very valuable. Testing car oh, okay, got you. That might be very scary. So are you the person wearing these VR goggles and testing the cars and then simulating a crash? That could be scary as well, because nowadays the VRs are really realistic. I'm using PyTorch. Okay. Okay, perfect. So you're building machine learning applications that stimulate that kind of scenarios. Um, so I'm guessing you have some predictive models that determine the likelihood of a crash for a given kind of car, something like that. Very interesting. Very interesting. There it is. I have a background in data science and predictive analytics, so I am very fascinated with um, machine learning, but even more fascinated with the applications of machine learning, such as AI, because now I think it's very interesting times we live in. Test set is provided by the company. Oh, okay. Okay. Got you. So you're using real world data, and you're you're understanding, the relationships between different factors and the crashes. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, let's go back to the. Have you built applications with Streamlit Is that something that you you want to learn? Perhaps we could even build out a machine learning application using Streamlit. There's a lot of applications that use data science, machine learning, and have a Streamlit front end. So that could be valuable for your field as well when you're building out web apps, for example. Okay, so with ST Chat Message Assistant, we write the prompt, and we are going to, yeah, I definitely recommend you to try it out. For example, you go to Streamlit and you have documentations. Um, Actually, no concepts. There's a community around Streamlit, that Streamlit data science. I don't know if you know the data professor. He makes a lot of apps and he's a big advocate of data science. But essentially, you can use Streamlit to create anything, right? You can create a dashboard, something like that. You can add components like calendars, basic UI interface. So over here, build powerful apps. So you'll notice there's a lot of apps built by the community. So if you go to uh, NLP and language or data visualization, I love data visualization because it really helps you understand data in a simple way. So you can look at this kind of apps and also think about something you can build open source for your company or perhaps for yourself. Yeah, absolutely, man. Anytime, just connect with me and we can talk more. Sounds like you have some experience in your field. All right, so let's go back to the code here. Okay, no worries, man. Thanks for coming in and hopping on. So we are going to create the assistant message, st.write prompt. And so this is what it looks like currently. Yeah, I think the live videos are great because it gives out people a lot of context how to solve problems. Python is definitely not easy. People get scared when they see error messages. This is a way to help people understand that it takes a little bit of work, but it's really easy. All right, so let's see stream. So we have context. So okay, so we stored the messages. We're not going to store the messages here. So we created an empty thread, so we created an empty variable list. So sorry, not a variable. We created an empty list called messages, right? So in that list, we're now going to append user assistant responses. So let's go ahead and start writing this up. So it's going line by line. ST session state messages append role user content prompt. Okay, we're going to append this whole object right here, role user content prompt. The messages are going to have two things. Let's go to actually let's go to our fig jam right here. Let me draw this out for you. So this is the message object, the message or the message list, right? So it's going to have the role, and then you have the content. This is the message list. It's a list, right? So role content, and you have role content. user, content, assistant, content. So we need content for the user, we need content for the assistant. Content for the user is going to be the prompt or the query that the user sends. Okay, so if you go back to our web app right here, this block right here, every time we write something here and we run this, it's going to save this in the content. So basically that means it's going to save this role user content prompt. So we're taking that prompt and we are saving this. We're basically we're just adding a little, we're just putting this as a value for content, and we're taking this whole block right here and we're appending it. We're appending it to the message list that we just created earlier. Okay, let's go back. Okay, yeah, so we are appending it back to this message list that we created. Cool. So we have the user's query. We display the user's query. Now we're now appending the user's query into the message. And what about the assistant's response? You might say, hey, Imtiaz, we can't have just the user's query. We need the assistant's response. We need ChatGPT. We need AI. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting to the fun part, but I want to show you the framework so that you understand everything you need to know before you connect to the API. Right? With ST chat, so it'll be the same method for the assistant. So this is going to be the user, and this is going to be the assistant. All right, assistant. There we go. Response. Let's just make the response. For now, let's just keep it like this: st write test or assistant response. We're not connecting with the API. We're just showing you the framework, how you can append all the messages and display this one by one. Okay, so we'll just have this set up ready. And just like we appended the messages from the user, we are now going to append the messages from the assistant. So assistant content is going to be response. Well, content. So we need to store this. Actually, the response equals to this is a cleaner way to do this. You write the response, you create a response variable, you store the text, and then using st.write, you're just displaying the response. Since we store this in the response variable, we can just call this later to append it back to the messages. All right, so st session state message append. Okay, this is good. Actually, we can just do this. Okay. We can just do this in one line. We're not only storing the response, but we're also writing the message. Okay, so we have both, two birds in one stone. Cool. So we have a setup now. We're storing the messages, but let's see how this is going to work. Let's go ahead. step by step, okay? Hello, assistant response. Test, assistant response. Why are you not displaying all the messages? Every time I send a message, it's running top to bottom, meaning it's still not giving me that user assistant response. It's giving me just the just the prompt, just the latest query and the output. So the way we do this, because the Streamlit runs from top to bottom. Every time we run the app, it's going to go title, caption, prompt, and go through all these steps right here. So it doesn't necessarily have something stored in the session state. Well, it does. We did store the message, but it doesn't have a method of displaying those messages. So now we need to create a method to display all the messages we just stored in using the append function. We just stored all these messages from the user and the assistant in this list called messages. So we need to display this somehow. All right, so let's go ahead and set it up. For loops. Okay, if you're not familiar with for loops, I can show you a very simple example. All right, let's go ahead and comment this out. So when we run this code, it's not going to run the code. So the way you comment anything out, you press Control \, and it will become green. And then there's going to be a hashtag in front, which means that it's commented out. All right. So now we run the code, it's just going to run what we run right here. All right. So let's close our Streamlit app. Control C, you close the Streamlit app. All right. Let's give you a basic example how loop works. Okay. For example, we have a list. Let's just call this fruits. Store this in a list. Fruits could be apples, oranges, and then grapes. Okay, we have all these items in a list. These items are, quotation, are in between quotation marks because they are strings separated by commas. Okay, so these are all the items in the list. Now we want to loop through all the items in the list. We talked about how to use the print function. We're going to print out all these items one by one. So the way we do this is with a for loop, and this for loop is probably one of my favorite functions in Python because you can do so much. You can run a code 1,000 times by specifying, a minimum and a maximum number. So it runs from that minimum to maximum number of times. So yeah, so you can specify that. So let's just say 4 items in fruits. Now the items, it could be any word or whatever. It doesn't matter what you put here in the items. But the fruits, this variable has to be an already established list or variable, etc. So we already have a list called fruits. So we're just going to use that for items in fruits, print items. All right, this is the most common setup. Save this. Let's run this. Python main.py. All right, apples, oranges, grapes. So it's printing each of these items line by line. Okay, cool. So you know now how for loop works. Let's go uncomment all this out. So it's back in business. Now we're going to write the for loop. So for message in st session state messages, we're going to say Oh yeah, we're going to display the messages with context. So meaning, when you see my video right here, when I display the messages, it also displays the avatar, the user's avatar and the assistant's avatar. Okay, so we need to display the messages with context. So st chat message chat message is the function from Streamlit that allows you to add context to your chat messages. St markdown. If you go back to the documentation, Streamlit cheat sheet. This is what you need, and cheat sheet. So markdown. Okay, so you can display the messages in markdown format. Message content. All right, let's go back to the FigJam and understand that we stored our messages from the user and the assistant with these variables, role and content, right? This is where they saved, whether it's a user or assistant, and what the content is going to be. So basically, it's the context is going to provide message role. So it's going to pull either the user or the assistant, and then message content. So it's either going to pull the user's content or the assistant's content. It's going to display them one by one. Okay, so we have the for loop set up to display all the messages. Let's save this, and let's go ahead and run this. Streamlit run main.py. Cool, it's running. Let's close the previous one. So let's say hello. Oh, it's still doing assistant response. Okay, let's go back to the code. Okay, let's put this on the top. Let's say this. Okay, this did not work. Okay, let's put this here. Oh, did I call it 2 times? line 28. Start chat. Create a start chat. Okay. So now it's storing the messages from the user and the assistant, and it's appending it into the message list. And every time we start our session, our chat, it's basically going to create the message in our session empty message list in our session state. It is then going to loop through all the messages or all the objects that are stored in the message list, and then it's going to print it out. So every time, so we've already started the chat, and now we are basically running this block of code that are basically controlling the session. Okay, so for the session, we have the message list, and we are displaying all the items that are stored in the message list so far with each iteration, with each time we write code in the prompt. Hello. Okay, assistant response. Okay, so we now have a basic framework where we can write a message, we get the assistant's response back, and then we're going to append it to a message variable, a message list, and display them top to bottom with every new prompt. So if prompt, and we have context that allows us to use the specific avatars, user or the assistant. Okay. We are now going to create another functions. We're not going to create another function. This is the last function you need to create, which is a stream generator. This will allow us to use the thread ID that we created, use that thread ID, user's query to pass to the assistant in OpenAI. And OpenAI is going to then respond. So we are going to wrap this in a streaming function so that it returns back the response as chunks, word by word. When it responds in chunks, we can now stream the response. And, for example, I'm going to show you what that looks like. You go to this code right here. You notice how it streamed the response. So the way we do this is through something called, streaming, and we need to get the words as chunks. The benefit of using stream is the response time. We get the response as soon as each word is generated, something similar to ChatGPT. So we don't have to wait till the whole response is generated. We just get word by word every little block, and then we're going to display this. Okay, so we are going to use the stream. We're going to create a new function called stream generator. Stream generator. So call it stream generator. We'll have two parameters, prompt and thread ID. We're going to use message.create function to create a message. And I'm also going to provide you this code after this session so you can just use the code and adapt it to your needs. So you don't have to write this from scratch. I'm writing this from scratch so that you understand each element. And if you want to modify it, you know exactly what you're doing. Again, we have another context using ST spinner. So let me give you the documentation here. ST spinner. So every time the assistant is generating response, you'll notice there's a spinner avatar. The way they do this is through the spinner context. Okay, so we are going to wrap this in this kind of similar framework with ST spinner. And we are going to create stream equals to threads.run. We create the message. Now we create the run. Okay, so let's go back to the assistant framework again to understand how the assistant framework works. Okay, we need to create an assistant. We already have an assistant. We then need to create a thread. We already created a thread. Now we need to create a message. Okay, so the message could be the user's prompt or user's query. When we have the message, we append it to the thread, and then we run. We create a run function and we run it. So this is where you can specify whether you want it to stream or not. Stream is a little bit complex to understand, but once you get it, your applications are going to be streamlined. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to the code. So we're going to use the threads.run.create function. We go to the API reference, threads, actually run. So we're actually using this function right here, and you can turn it to streaming. So now you have an idea what the request format will look like. You'll need a thread ID parameter, assistant ID, and you need to specify stream equal to true. And then you're going to display all the events in the stream. When you display all the events in the stream, you're specifically looking for the text delta objects. Okay, so this is a response. Oh, I lost it. Okay, let's go back. Threads. Sorry, runs. Create run. All right. These are all the events that are happening during the run. We create a run. Run is queued. Run is in progress. Then message is created. Message in progress. Message delta. Thread message delta. This is the assistant's message. So when the assistant gets the request, it's going to start generating the message word by word. And it's going to send you these chunks as thread message to delta. So we need to find out the event object thread.message. We need to loop through the events, catch the thread message delta, and then display something called text value, which is in this case, hello, today. These are word by word. If you combine all these words together, it's going to form a sentence, and we're going to write this up in the function. So with st spinner, this gives the context. It's spinning. It's going to finish spinning when it gets the complete response. So we're going to for event in stream. If you go back to the reference, for event in stream, print event. We're not going to, let's print the event. Okay, let's see what the event looks like. So you have an idea what it looks like. Print event. Or how about st write event? This is going to display the results in our front end framework. If we do print, it's going to display it in our back end framework. Let's just see it in the front end. Okay, so st.write event. We've already talked about how for loops work, and this is another application. Okay, so save this. Now we go back to that point where we said the response is assistant response. Okay, instead the assistant response, we're going to use the stream generator response. Stream generator response. Actually, we need this to generate the stream response. Yield event. Okay, yield event. And system message response. we're going to wrap this inside a write stream function. So what is a write stream? So it's basically allows you to stream the responses rather than just displaying it. So this is actually a function from Streamlit called write stream. So anytime you're using the write stream function, you need to also create a stream generator, which we did right here. We created a stream generator, and the responses are going to be, there's a function called yield, which is going to yield each of these chunks. Okay, let's run this and see what it looks like. Thread ID is not defined. Okay, thread ID is not defined. Okay, when the application starts for the first time, it needs to also create a thread. We're going to use thread equals to client beta test.create. So when you start a session with the assistant, it's going to create that thread. So we need this to happen every time it runs. Well, actually, we don't really need this to happen every time, because then it's going to create multiple threads. We have already created this function called ensure single thread ID. So we need to plug this function into our framework right here. So we're going to create thread right here. So thread ID equals to ensure single thread ID. Now, if you recall what it's doing, this function we created earlier, we didn't run the function, we just created the function. Running and creating functions are two different things. So when we created the function, it's basically saying, when we run this function, it's going to check if thread ID is not in session state. Thread ID is not saved in session state, it's going to create a new thread using threads.create. It's going to store the ID from the thread. It's going to store it in something called thread ID, which is then stored in the session. So this variable is going to persist throughout the length of the session. So we use the same thread, and the assistant has context of past messages in that same session, etc. So this is definitely something you need in your framework. All right, so we save this. We run this again. Oh. All right, boom. It's exactly what we want to happen. Okay, we have connected with the assistant API, and now we've created a message object using the user's query. We sent it off to the assistant, and we created a run function that generates the responses from the assistant, each event at a time. So these are all the events that are happening: thread run queued, thread run queued, created in progress, created in progress. So you can see each of these events one by one. Now, we don't want all the events. We want specific events, and we want specific chunks to be displayed back for the assistant's response. So the way we do this is very simple. We go back to our code, and see we are displaying all the events. We're just gonna get rid of this. For event in stream, we're gonna check if the event data object is thread message delta. Okay, so if we check back to the reference. These are event data object, okay? Event data object is thread message delta. If it is thread message delta, we're just going to pull out the content, event data context. So I'll show you how to read the JSON structure in another video in more detail. So for now, let's go ahead and run through this. For content in event, we're trying to get to the specific text chunks. Yield context, content text value. So content text value. Okay, we're going into that structure so we can pull out that exact value. Okay, from this thread message delta object. Then else pass. Because it's an if statement, there could be a condition, and if it doesn't meet that condition, we need it to do something else. So if there is a thread message delta, so it's going to go through all the events in this, it's going to loop through all the events. It's going to find whether it's thread message delta. So if it finds that it's thread message delta, it's going to yield the text value for for streaming out the response. And if it doesn't find that object, if it's some other object like thread message in progress, created, whatever, it's just going to pass. So with the pass statement, it just ignores those items. All right. So I think this is it. I think this is literally it. So we now go back to code, rerun this, run the web app. Hi. How can I assist you? Who are you? AI developed by OpenAI. Okay, perfect. So we have a streaming chatbot developed using OpenAI and Streamlit. I walked you step by step, and we created the whole code from scratch. And this is literally all you need to connect with the OpenAI assistant, get those functions, connect with Streamlit, get those functions, put it together into a complete end-to-end chatbot that you can run in your local computer. If you want to learn how you can maybe embed this into a website or deploy it into a web server, or something similar to a ChatGPT, I can show you that as well. Now, if you like this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get updated every time I come online or drop a new video. And yeah, hopefully you find value in this video, and let me know what you would like to learn next, and we'll go ahead and drop that video as well. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you on Tuesday.